The gentleman who's going to lead that discussion is Peter High. And I want to spend a minute telling you about Peter High. He's become a very trusted colleague. Peter is the president of Metis Strategy, which is a CIO consulting and strategy firm. Many of you know Peter. You've talked to him, you've consulted with him, he's interviewed you. He's a columnist for Forbes magazine and has written some terrific articles in Forbes. He's written 2 books on the challenges that CIOs face. He's got a 3rd book coming out here in September, and as I learned last night, he's got a 4th book he's working on, which is about how the CIO becomes even more of a business leader and takes on more responsibilities. And I know many of you who have been CIOs have been elevated to take on things like shared services, business processes, procurement, real estate, other business functions within the company. And Peter's done a lot of research on that and sort of how the CIO moves up to the next level, even to the board level and to the CEO level at times. So we're really happy to have Peter here with us. He's been a terrific partner for me, and if you don't know Peter, hopefully you'll get to know him during the session here, and he's going to lead our next panel discussion. So Peter, please join me on stage.
What a generous introduction.
Thanks, Peter. You got it. Yep.
Thank you all. John, I'm overwhelmed by that very generous introduction. Thank you so much. I'm honored to have you as a friend. I'm honored to be here. Thank you to HP more generally for including me. Ramon, it's also great to be following you, another dear friend. I'd like to really talk a bit about the same themes, frankly, that have already been introduced here. I think that this whole notion of the new style of IT is really here to stay. And I think it's something that we all need to be thinking about a little bit more. By virtue of painting a picture here about how this change is happening so much more rapidly than it did in the past, I wanted to actually ask a quick question. What industry do you think the company with the best stock performance of the 1980s, what industry do they come from? Just call it out. Airline? Sorry? Computers? So technology firm of some sort? Good guess? Oil and gas? Energy? Maybe one more? Okay, no more. I think they're only serving decaf downstairs. All right, well, it was actually a retail company, interestingly enough. Circuit City was the best performing stock of the 1980s. They only went public in 1984. So in less than 6 years, they returned over 8,000%. Fascinating, right? So they were a company founded in 1949 as Ward's, a regional player in Richmond, Virginia. Sam Wurtzel was the CEO and founder of that company. They really caught their stride in the 1970s by rethinking the customer experience. How do we take this emerging consumer electronics space and its ever-growing complexity and portfolio and make it easier for our customers, have more selections in our stores, have better salespeople who can counsel our customers better, and think about how to connect the dots between different parts of the technology that we're selling. That success certainly continued through the 1990s. They actually established several other companies. They established a bank, a North American banking company, Divix Video. They also established a little company called CarMax, which you may be familiar with, $12.5 billion in revenue per year now. Still very much a going concern, and founded in 1993. That success continued into the 2000s. In 2001, Jim Collins featured Circuit City in Good to Great as one of the companies that others ought to emulate. They had practices that he believed to be sustainable and that would be good for all other companies even beyond that industry to think about. And a lot of that actually revolved around their customer intimacy and thinking about customer experience. Now what's fascinating is that was 2001. 8 years later, they went from good to great to gone. 2008, they went into Chapter 11. 2009, they were liquidated. That's a pretty amazing story, right? But it talks about how quickly the pace of business changes. And actually that customer intimacy strength that they long had, they started to take their eye off the ball. I just mentioned those other businesses they began to dabble in. So successful ones, certainly. But another player came on the stage, Best Buy. Best Buy, in 1993, I mentioned Circuit City established CarMax. In 1994, Best Buy established the Geek Squad. And so now all of a sudden this very complex, increasingly complex portfolio of consumer electronics, from televisions to various formats in which video is consumed, to music, to obviously personal computing and all the various peripherals associated with that. Now there were people that could help you install it into your house and explain it and connect the dots for you and make that a much higher touch, easier experience for you. And as a result, they stole a lot of market share, and by 2007, 2008, certainly 2009, were the unquestioned leader in the consumer electronics space. Now, fast forward a little bit more, and there's a new company, not so new company, a 19-year-old company that dominates the consumer electronics space along with some other retail segments. Anyone care to hazard a guess there? Hey, the caffeine's kicking in, I guess. That's right, Amazon, the behemoth in that space. And what's so interesting is they've done it without a single store. I don't think any of you have probably visited an Amazon store recently or spoken with a customer representative at Amazon probably. But through digital channels, they've been able to create extraordinary customer intimacy and make an experience that keeps us going back again and again. If we go to some retail organizations have become sort of the front door or the showroom for Amazon to touch and feel the product before it's then bought there. But they get to know us. They gather information on us. They make suggestions about things that are good for us to buy, but things that we've bought in the past and drawing connections to make that a much better experience. And this is where the role of the CIO gets tied in. Because I think that the folks in this room have a lot to say in terms of how this kind of change is going to be enacted in your business. I had a great conversation last night with Roger Gurnani. Roger, are you, where are you? There's Roger, thank you. Roger, who's the CIO of Verizon, was talking about some of the change that he's enacting there in order to engage customers in new, interesting ways. At Verizon Wireless, you can order a phone, and all the different stores are connected now in a way that will allow you to have that shipped to you same day, fulfilled by virtue of the stores that are nearby. And you can play with it, test it. If you like that phone, great, keep it. If you don't, send it back and get a new one. All of a sudden taking a lot of the advantages they have, both with the bricks as well as the clicks, to make a much more intimate experience. And one of the things that I found so fascinating about my conversation last night, but also several recent conversations I've had with Roger, he spends over 50% of his time with customers as CIO of that company. And that's really what I think everyone in this room needs to do to a much greater extent. Again, harking on some of the themes that Ramon covered so well also. It's so important that we all become much more customer intimate and think about the translation of how trends are going to impact our businesses and how we can translate that for the rest of the organization. And we're seeing this in the private sector with examples like Verizon, but we're also seeing it in the public sector. I don't know if folks in the room have seen or have read about the Street Bump app in Boston, but Bill Oates, the former CIO there, developed an application that people in Boston could download, and as they were driving, the accelerometer and the GPS would identify where there were bumps in the street, potholes, for instance. And as they gathered more and more data to the point of statistical significance, could understand, gosh, these are some roads we really need to repair. And so government, with a very creative CIO, partnering with other parts of the organization, of the government, of the city governments, being more responsive to the needs of their constituents and making sure that the roads are safer, the roads are easier to drive on. So we're seeing this again and again. And what I think is so exciting is the CIOs are leading that change to a greater extent. I want to leave you with a few thoughts on how do you enact some of these changes, and then I'd like to personify some of these lessons by bringing up a distinguished panel to talk about these as well. So I wanted to talk about 6 different things. First and foremost, it's so important to build a strong IT core. Ramon was talking about some of the transformation here at HP. Make IT more flexible, more variable, more agile, and more reliable, certainly. If your embedded infrastructure is the collection of your past decisions, you need to make sure that's operating well so you're not looking in the past, but can spend more of your time looking to the future, which is the domain of innovation, needless to say. Partner with the customer-facing parts of your organization to a greater extent, the sales team, the marketing team, the product and service areas of your organization. Help them bring to life their imperatives so that there's a better opportunity to deliver strong technology to your customers. After all, your customers use Amazon, they use Netflix, they use Google, they use all these organizations that have such compelling digital footprints, and they're going to be expecting more out of your own organization, even if you're not a direct competitor of these companies. Number 3, develop an R&D mentality. I loved Ramon's thought of looking around the corners. You need to be constantly thinking about what sorts of changes in the technology landscape translate well for our company. Where is there an imperative that I've been learning as I've been speaking with various leaders in my organization that might be met by some new technology that's emerging, or maybe a technology that's been around for a while but now has some sort of application to your business? That's something you need to be doing and taking control of to a much greater extent. 4, better leverage the ecosystem of partners. This is a great example of that, of course, with the company that's hosting us today. Leverage your partnerships with HP and others among your strategic portfolio of vendors, not just for fulfilling work, but for providing insights and ideas about innovation. These are organizations that have partnerships with so many companies. Just look around this room, for instance. Tap that for greater insight and better innovative ideas. 5thly, ensure that IT speaks the language of business, and that language is finance. IT departments traditionally have not done so well in translating for the rest of the organization the financial benefits that are going to be delivered as a result of the major investments that are made. And IT needs to do that to a much greater extent. So not just the cost side, but the benefit side. This is where IT gets invited to the conversation to a greater extent on innovation and ways in which revenues can be enhanced. And then lastly, there is only one customer, the end customer. IT departments, for some reason, have historically used this subservient language, IT versus the business, or referring to colleagues as customers. We need to stop that. That is a suggestion that we have a degree removed from the actual customers who provide revenue for our organizations. And so calling your customers, your colleagues customers, is a declaration that you have that distance, that you're unwilling to bridge the gap between your organization and the people who are the most important people to your company. I think it's so critically important. Language matters, and it's important that we do things a little bit differently as a result of that.